Okay, you're an IP lawyer. Can you help us out? So the headline is Palworld has been sued. That's the best way to put it? Your Honor?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
by Nintendo and the Pokemon Company, quote, on the grounds that Palworld, a game developed and released by the defendant, infringes multiple patent rights. Nintendo will continue to take necessary actions against any infringement of its intellectual property rights, including the Nintendo brand itself, to protect the intellectual properties it has worked hard to establish over the years. Back off,
Poor
please.
Nintendo.
Poor Nintendo.
Aw, they work so hard.
So the twist, and this is what we need your help on, is it's not like they said, hey, that looks like Psyduck. Here's a lawyer. They said, no. These are the patents we're coming after you for. Can you explain what's going on there?
There's different types of IP law, and feel free to interrupt me because I might just ramble forever about this because this topic's complicated. But yeah, no, so copyright's completely different from patents. There's copyright, trademarks, patents, and then like kind of trade secrets, but that's just if you're good at keeping a secret, you get to keep the secret. It's not really, it's its own thing. But the Pepsi recipe, one of the most classic trade secrets, the Guinness recipe, it's mostly drinks and stuff. But so patents are completely different from copyright. Copyright's artistic expression, so music, art, code, text, all that kind of stuff. So the actual look of the characters is what we were talking about last time when Palworld came out. So, that happens to look a lot like Lucario. That would be like a copyright analysis to if they substantially took too much of that design to make it their own and benefit off of Nintendo's IP. But this is patent analysis. So patents protect inventions is like the easiest way I could maybe describe it. So it's like processes, compositions, methods, like all these things could be a patent. But what I've been screaming about since 2018 is that there's a lot of game mechanic patents getting approved that shouldn't be getting approved, I think. Because one of the core things behind patent law is you can't patent an idea. Like if I tried to patent 2 + 2 = 4, the world would stop working, right? Like every time someone did math, I'd be like, give me $10. Like it would just
satellites would fall
function.
out of the sky. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you're supposed to patent the function of things. So even if your patent is kind of idea-ish, if you're trying to protect how that idea functions, then it could still be protected. But what case law in Canada and the US and Japan too has been finding is that if the thing you're trying to patent protect, if the only new thing about it is just the idea of it, even if it's happening on a computer, that's where it gets really confusing. As soon as computers came around, software patents got really confusing and the courts were like, like they didn't know how to deal with it because all of a sudden it gets way more complicated when you go from like a toilet seat to like a complicated software system. It's like, is this idea just happening on a computer or is it an idea? And like, doesn't matter that it's on a computer, it just is still an idea. But then it's also hard because sometimes it seems like an idea, but they're still patent protecting the function of something occurring and it happens to happen on a computer. It's really confusing.
So, I mean, you mentioned during the PlayStation reaction stream that Dynasty Warriors had a patent on changing the difficulty of the number of enemies around you. Like that's an example of something that seems like you shouldn't be able to patent that.
There's lots of them. Like what's an example? Katamari's patented, like pushing a ball and the ball gets bigger as more things get lumped into it. Like no one.
There's like a super old one too, and I'm trying to find it so I don't butcher this, but I know that like Philips was suing everybody in the beginning because they had a patent that was basically just on like kind of the concept of a video game, like two objects on a screen are colliding and reacting to each other, which is just like
Palworld.
Every single video game. And I don't know what ultimately ended up happening with that patent, if it's like still around or is expired or they've, thrown it out or whatever since then. But like a lot of companies got burned by that. I know in the like in the 80s and 90s, because they were just like, well, sure, that's a stupid patent. Surely I don't have to license it. And then they did.
Weird. So
there was a Namco one that for playable mini games and loading screens.
Right.
Yeah,
Which
is from
that expired right
1995
when loading screens got quick. So I was like,
Yeah,
damn
right.
it.
right. Yeah. But
What
those,
an evil act. What a better world we would have
I know.
if we could
right?
have those.
That was Sega that patented that. That expired in 2015. But they had the entire, like, you get a monopoly on the market for 20 years. Canada, US, Japan, it's all 20 years. A lot of places it's 20 years. Other places, it's jurisdictionally based as well. So, like, if I want to patent protect something, I have to file in every jurisdiction I want to have that monopoly in. So I don't just say, I'm filing a patent and it applies throughout the whole world. I have to apply in US, Canada, Japan, like all the countries in Europe I want to market to if I want those monopolies. So
is what is happening here is judges can't understand video games. So patents have just been handed out willy-nilly since the origins of video games, and everyone's sitting on these war chests of confusing nebulous video game patents. And this is the first real example of a company using it as a way to attack a game that it's clearly mad at because it's ripping them off in other ways.
So it's not judges judges
Sure.
would deal with infringement issues, but this would be like the USPTO, the Canada Intellectual Property Office, the Japanese Intellectual Property Office. They're the ones that get the application. So when you get a patent, you don't just get it like with copyright. Like I could scribble on a piece of paper and I could hold it up and be like, here's my smiley face, and I own that copyright. I don't have to do anything extra. You get benefits if you register it, but you don't have to. You still own it. But with patents, you don't get the patent unless you file it. And there's all these requirements to patentability. Like I can't just walk in and be like, here's my toilet seat. They're going to say toilet seats exist. You don't get a patent on a toilet seat, you idiot. Like you have to have something that's new, non-obviousness, and useful. And those are the requirements for patentability.
Okay,
and it has to be a subject matter.
Is this the concern, though? Is the idea that everyone just has a war chest of nebulous patents and now it's kind of game on?
So what's unfortunately happened is all these patents have been approved over the years that arguably I think are just ideas that are executed via software, but because they're written very software-y weird, that they get approved because it sounds like they're trying to get the functionality occurring on a software approved, but really it's just I could delete all the references to computers and stuff, and they're ultimately just trying to protect like this happens, and it's like that shouldn't be protected. That's the antithesis of the point of a patent system. Otherwise, nothing would happen. So, like for example, they owned Nintendo owns a ton of patents. They had one for Eternal Darkness.
Yeah.
It was the one that has Link in the patent drawings, which is super funny. I don't know why they did that. But their patent protected the insanity meter in the corner of the screen. So the lower your insanity goes, the more crazy stuff happens. It was what the patent protected. That's just an idea that happens to happen on a computer, right? Like, why are we patent protecting that?
Sure.
But because software patents were so new and it was kind of a confusing, nebulous time. In the 90s, a ton of them got approved because they were like, computers, yeah. They were like, approved, like the Knuckles thing. Like literally, they were just like approving all these. Now it's a lot harder to get software patents protected. Like the Nemesis system patent took 6 tries.
Oh, wow.
And then finally Warner Brothers got it. But I've read
You
that
got
patent
us,
many times.
stranger.
Oh my God. It's the worst patent it's one of the worst patents I've ever seen. I was talking to my coworker at my office who's a patent agent, which is a whole different type of lawyer who writes patents. And I was like, can you read this for me? Like, what do you think? He's like, how'd they get this approved? This is awful. Like, it's crazy. They just get lucky. Like the right patent agent might look at it and be like, yeah, I guess so. But then it costs, sorry, what were you gonna say?
How often has this been an issue though?
For so long.
Okay, but like the suing, like I understand everybody's hoarding these patents, but
Yes.
like
I want to
don't
know why the Nemesis system patent was so awful. I want to know what was awful about it.
Oh, so they have you have to list what claims you're patenting. So essentially like, what's your new thing that fixes a problem that has utility? And you have to put it at the very start. And they have this long list of claims. The first 2 claims essentially say, player interacts with NPC1, NPC1 affects NPC2, which is like, I kill Orc, his cousin remembers, right? Like that's like, if we could boil down the Nemesis system to like one thought, that's what it is.
Yeah.
And then they have like 17 claims that are just baloney garbage. So like a function of the code goes X, Y, blah, 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 like all this nonsense. And at the very end, the last claim is NPC1, the effect from claim 1, which is player interacts with NPC1, interacts with NPC2, also affects NPC1. So they they have a patent for player interacts with NPC1 and it affects something, which is every game action ever in every game. It's like, what the hell are we doing? It's just written very, legalese and confusing. So it seems like what we're trying to protect is the computer doing all of that via a software function. But a ton of, I guarantee if someone else started making a Nemesis system and they ran the function different through their code, it doesn't have to be the exact, like they have all these nonsense garbage about how their code functions. They'd still be like, oh, but you can't do that because there's no, and they'd still go after them, right? It's
But have they? I mean, have people been attacked on these patent things? Much?
So Nintendo has sued other companies in the past for patent issues. We just don't really notice it as much. They sued a company in 2017 in the mobile games market in Japan and like ran them to the ground and essentially got, I think, 30 million from them, and they have to pay licensing fees moving forward. So they do it. They haven't done it like this, where it's very like, Palworld is very Pokemon coded, and you can tell they're pissed. And they tried copyright, and they probably thought about it, and were like, we might not win, so let's go for patents. And this has been something they've been doing since the 90s. There was an Atari and Nintendo case in the 90s, which is when they figured out that patents are better, which was essentially... Atari wanted the code for the 10 NES system, which is like the lockout system that made it so you couldn't play other games on the NES. And they couldn't figure out the reverse engineering of the code. They ended up stealing the code from the Copyright Office, which is a whole other thing. But what that case decided was reverse engineering of code isn't an infringement of copyright, which hadn't been like formally decided at that time. So Nintendo was like, oh, like essentially like, no, like this is.
And that's how we have case. Like legal analog pockets and stuff like that.
Yeah.
As long as you can reverse engineer it and clean room, build it from the ground up.
But yeah, so they were like, shoot, that's the opposite of what we wanted to happen. So they started leaning. And in that same case, they enforced patents too. And the patents got enforced against them. So they were like, patents, just start filing them. They have dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of patents on like anything you could think of, like menu functionality. Like if you pause, in Super Mario Odyssey, when you pause the screen and it says resume ? They have a patent on that. So like if you come back to a game and it asks you, would you like to resume where you last were? They have a patent on that. It's like so much stuff that they let other companies slide with it. But what's bad about this industry specifically is they sit on their ass and choose who they want to enforce it against. And then it creates this weird fear of retribution in the market where now not just other huge game companies like Sony or whatever, but like indies are like, what if they choose me? Like, oh God. And then they have to sit there and go, okay, do we push back release until the patent's expired? Do we remove that game mechanic? Do we release anyways and cross our fingies? But what sucks with Nintendo is the more money you make, the bigger the target gets on your back. So it's like your death of success, right? So if I had a really cool game that had patented system Nintendo has, like the throwing a ball, catching something mechanic, which they patent for Arceus back in 2021. They have a patent on that. If I made a game that had, they have so many patents and no one, I've been screaming into the void about this. I'm like, this is gonna suck. But like, it's just like now suddenly people care about it. If someone wanted to make a game where like I throw a sphere to catch like little cakes or something, whatever, you might think, oh, it's different. It's not like Pokemon, but they could sue them, potentially try to sue them for that. It would cost so much money to re-examine the patent, try to get it impeached, like hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially. Like only Epic or Sony or Microsoft or something would be the ones that would be like, okay, sue us, let's go invalidate your patents. So they probably wouldn't even choose those type of people. They would choose someone right in the middle who's making a lot of money, but might not would necessarily not want to go to court. It might just settle outside of court to move on with their lives. So like they almost don't want them to go to court.
So it's weird. Like they might have a point that Palworld is heavily inspired by Pokemon, but the main ammo they have is just this BS stockpile of patents that a lot of big companies have. So everybody has a target reticle on everybody else, and they can fire when ready.
It's like the nukes. It's like the nukes of the game dev world.
So do we know anything about the patent specifically here? Is probably the ball throwing thing, right?
It's probably the Arceus one, yeah, for sure. But they said multiple patents, and I would imagine they do the same thing they did in 2017 with that mobile game, is they just like flooded them with anyone that could stick. So they're going to throw the Arceus one because that's obvious, because that's in Palworld. But they'll probably, what took so long is probably they were going over every single patent they own and playing the crap out of Palworld and looking at all its code and every single thing it does. And they're going to throw every single patent they could potentially use against them, even if some of them it's like, no, that wouldn't count or whatever. They'll do like the menu functionality, if they have any touchscreen functionality, that Nintendo has a ton of touchscreen functionality, any controller functionality, any like AR aiming functionality. I don't know if that's in Palworld, but like anything like that, they have a bunch of patents on, and they'll just go, and they'll just like chuck every single one, and Pocket Pair is going to go, oh no, and just drown in it.
I don't know anything about anything.
Right.
If this does go to court and Nintendo does win, does that set precedent that changes anything else or changes how often people would go after these kinds of cases?
This is in Japan as well as the other thing to think about. So they're suing them in Japan. You can pick the forum in which you sue somebody, but it has to be limited to where your patent's filed and or where the infringement occurred. So I believe the Arceus patent is Japan and US. So they could have chose either jurisdiction, and also they could, it also depends where the infringement occurred, but it also has to be where the patent's filed. So I would think they chose Japan because they did a ton of research and figured out there's enough case law in Japan that specifically favors these specific patents we want to leverage. So let's just do it in Japan so we have a better chance of winning. There might even be case law of them winning with the patents they want to use already. Like the specific patents they want to use, they already won in previous cases. So when they go to court in Japan, the judge would say, in the case you were in, which you won, you brought this exact patent. And it just kind of makes it like, okay, we're going to win because we already won once, essentially, as long as the facts are kind of somewhat similar.
Yeah, it's so weird. I was, I think it was SGF. I was talking to the CEO of the company behind Palworld here, Pocket Pair. And I brought this whole thing up about, Pokemon and the, obvious comparisons and everything, and he's like,
of course it's the ball throwing that is so similar.
That's right, that's it. But he's like, oh no, like our studio's in Tokyo, like we know all those guys from the Pokemon Company and Game Freak, and we're good friends, so it's all good. It was his explanation. It's like, yeah, there are other people maybe up in Kyoto that were not friendly about this whole concept.
Right.
It's like when Jeff Keighley says he's friends with Hideo Kojima, and
Sure.
like, you sure, buddy?
Right. Yeah, good job, friendship, yeah.
Definitely, a lot of different people. Like, I mean, it's so much of this industry's beauty is how developers share things with each other.
Right.
At things like GDC, it's all about lifting each other up. If I came up with a cool new idea, I want people to build on it. And then there are other people who are not the creatives that are in this business who are spending their full lives doing horrible like this.
Or maybe
this is the opposite of what patents are supposed to do too. Like patents always kind of seem yucky because you always hear about them in the pharmaceutical sense and like all that kind of stuff. But what they're for is if you think it's going to cost a lot of money to invent this really cool thing that could help society, you deserve to be the only one who sells it for a little bit. And like that tracks. Like back when the light bulb was getting invented, like that patents were the thing that like let people know, okay, you're going to invest pretty much all your savings into making this, but then we'll have electricity after. Dope. But like it doesn't really work here where you're just trying to patent protect orcs being pissed at each other. It's like, shut up. That's not what this is for. This is frustrating.
So you're not giving legal advice here, obviously, but what's your prognostication? What happens here?
I would like to see Nintendo or other patent holding companies sue a big fish, and then they go bet, and they go to court and it invalidates a patent or two, and then they go, ooh, this is a little scary, maybe we won't sue. And then they'll be like, the fear gets shifted back on the patent holders to, let's not enforce our patents so we can at least keep the fear of maybe we will. You know what I mean? It's like, sure. And it kind of sucks that the indies never get to have a say in this whole debacle because trying to invalidate a patent costs literally so much money. But it really, I can see that as one of the only ways forward. And maybe the patent office is also getting a bit better at analyzing these and realizing this is just ideas getting patented. Because the other thing that's really frustrating the most is like the prior art thing is you can't patent something that already exists. And so much of game design is like, oh, that's a cool idea. Here's my spin on it.
UFO
and like,
50.
yeah, it could be a little bit different, but it's still based on prior art, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And, you analyze prior art with something called the POSITA. This is like one of my favorite acronyms, but it's person of ordinary skill in the art. So if I was trying to patent microchip, you have to say, is that obvious? So that like it's nothing new is created. It's just based on prior art to somebody, not just any person, but a technical engineer. So it has like a higher onus of, if I was making a microchip, Haley, looking at the patent, I'd be like, I don't know if this is obvious or not. I don't know anything about microchips. But to a posita who's a technical engineer, they might look at it and say, this is hella obvious. I do this every day at work. And then that could invalidate a patent. But what's annoying with the game mechanics or the things getting patented, a posita would be someone who's played every game ever made. Because we're not talking about the functionality of creating a game where a game developer would be the posita. And that makes sense because they can look at the code and say, okay, yeah, this is a unique functionality and this is solving a problem and this is blah, blah, blah. It's like, I think I saw this in a level in Titanfall 2 once.
Right,
like, you know what I mean?
right.
That's the prior art. It's not how it functions. It's what it is, which is not what game patent or patents in general is supposed to be protecting. So also that's super stupid. Do you really think the USPTO has people on staff who've played every game ever made? No. So even if it was protecting the idea, which is wrong, first off, shouldn't have been done. But even if then you say, okay, it's protected, is there prior art? It's like, has John Smith in Cubicle 20 played every game ever? No. So then it gets approved for that reason as well.
Yeah. Yeesh.
Haley, can you go in front of Congress and tell them all how stupid they're being and that they need to change how patents work for video games?
I think there just needs to be some kind of update to the patent acts that deals, because the word software doesn't show up in the Canadian or US patent acts anywhere in the entire act. I don't know about Japan because I haven't read those acts. But how do we have acts from like hundreds of years ago that don't have detailed rules about how to analyze software stuff when 50% of all patents filed since 2000 have been software patents? Like 50%. It used to be for basic stuff like buckets and stuff, and now it's like the most complicated technology of all time, and we haven't changed the language a little to adjust for that. It's just we're stuck in this in between where they're just like dragging their feet to update legal precedents and legal rules and stuff. And what's unfortunately happening is that sucks creativity out of industries and benefits the biggest handholders who have the most money to just file a bunch of stuff on the most mundane ideas. That little thing where you go behind a object and you can see your shadow.
Right.
You know, like when Mario goes behind a tree, but you can still see where he is because there's a shadow. Nintendo has a patent on that.
Damn it.
There's so much they have patents on that people don't even realize. Like I sometimes just go when I'm bored at work and search up their patents and scroll down. I'm like, what? The Splatoon mechanic of spraying paint on the ground?
Uh-oh.
They have everything. It's like they just go and file and file and file. And, you know, they say it's like a 50-50 chance to get a software patent approved because it's it can be hard to get them approved, but they just be filing every day more and more.
Oh my God. Haley McLean, everybody. Thank you.
Amazing. So
Thank
informative.
you.
So
Not
much better.
much legal
Should
advice.
you have charged us for this discussion?
Well, what was really funny was when this news dropped, I was on a plane to give a game mechanic patent talk. Hence why I could talk about it so quickly there, because I just researched it for like a week to get my brain back up to speed on the topic.
Yeah.
And when I landed, I checked my phone and it was like 1 million @s on Twitter just being like, Haley, this is the thing you've been talking about.
You talk
I'm
to
like,
us
"Oh my
about your
God."
exact expertise. Oh, that's so silly. If you thought, hey, this video wasn't bad, well, there's a whole lot more like it on MinnMax's YouTube channel. Please help us out by subscribing to our channel and checking out the MinnMax Show podcast, also available on your favorite podcast app, the best, most thorough discussion about games on the internet with the deepest dive, our monthly community trivia show with prizes called Trivia Tower, and a whole lot more. Thanks so much for your support, everybody. All you gotta do is click that subscribe button. We'd really appreciate it.